If you were born 1,000 years too early, you didn't die from a bullet. You died from a spray of liquid fire that burned underwater, or a stick of bamboo strapped with 100 rockets. Humans have been fighting other humans since the beginning of time, and honestly, we got creative way before we got advanced. Here are 7 insane ancient weapons that were actually used in combat, starting with the primitive stuff and ending with a weapon that basically invented the gun before the gun existed. Greek fire. We're starting with a weapon that was basically liquid nightmare. Greek fire was used by the Byzantine Empire starting in the 7th century, and it did something that should not be possible. It burned on top of water. You'd think jumping overboard would save you. Nope. The fire just followed you across the waves. Here's the wild part. Nobody today actually knows the real recipe. It was one of the most guarded secrets in ancient history. Guarded so hard that the Byzantines split the knowledge on purpose. The guy mixing the formula didn't know how the launcher worked. The guy launching it didn't know the recipe. So even when enemies captured the tubes and jars, they had nothing. They couldn't copy it. They couldn't even reverse engineer it. It was sprayed out of bronze tubes mounted on warships, basically a medieval flamethrower, and also hurled in clay jars like grenades. One Byzantine writer said the sight of it alone made enemies shake in terror before it even hit them. This one weapon single-handedly kept an empire alive for 700 years. The macuahuitl. This next one looks like a toy. When Spanish soldiers landed in Mexico in the 1500s, they ran into a weapon they genuinely didn't have a word for. It looked like a wooden cricket bat. It was actually a razor. The macuahuitl was a flat wooden paddle with obsidian glass blades glued into grooves along the edge. You may be wondering, isn't obsidian just volcanic rock? Sure, but shaped right, it's sharper than a modern surgical scalpel. Steel looks jagged under a microscope. Obsidian stays smooth as glass because that's exactly what it is. Spanish accounts swear this thing could take a horse's head clean off in one swing. One conquistador wrote about watching a horse get hit so hard its chest opened up and it dropped dead on the spot. Here's the catch though. Glass shatters. Against Spanish steel armor, the blades snapped right off after a couple hits. So the Aztecs usually weren't even trying to kill you outright. They wanted you alive for sacrifice later. Somehow that's the scarier detail. War elephants. Now imagine you're a Roman soldier who has never once in your life seen an elephant. And suddenly a 6,000-pound armored monster is charging your line at 20 miles an hour. That was Hannibal's entire strategy, and it worked more than once. Hannibal marched dozens of armored elephants across the actual Alps to invade Italy. Riders sat on top with spears and bows, turning the animal into a walking fortress that regular infantry could not simply brace and stop. But elephants had one massive design flaw. They panicked easily, and panicked elephants don't care whose side you're on. At the Battle of Zama, the Roman general Scipio built open lanes into his own formation on purpose. So the charging elephants would just run straight through and out the back instead of crushing his men. Some elephants got so spooked they turned around and trampled their own army instead. This happened often enough that mahouts, the elephant handlers, carried a hammer and a chisel at all times, just in case they needed to cut the animal's spine and drop it on the spot before it killed everyone nearby. Now that's a job description nobody signs up for. The repeating crossbow. Reloading one arrow at a time is a real problem when someone's actively trying to kill you. Ancient China's solution was the Chuko Nu, the repeating crossbow. Instead of one bolt, a whole magazine sat loaded on top. One pull of a lever cocked the string, dropped the next bolt into place, and fired all in a single motion. It hit softer than a normal crossbow, and the range was shorter. Didn't matter. A soldier could fire off 10 bolts in the time it took someone else to reload one regular crossbow. Coat those bolts in poison, which Chinese armies sometimes did, and you didn't even need a clean hit. A scratch would finish the job eventually. This turned an average foot soldier into a walking machine gun, 2,000 years before the machine gun was invented. The fire lance. This one might be my favorite on the list, because it's basically the gun's embarrassing ancestor. China strapped a bamboo tube packed with gunpowder to the end of a spear. Light the fuse, and it blasted flame, sparks, and sometimes broken pottery shrapnel straight at whoever was standing in front of you. It wasn't accurate. It usually wasn't safe for the guy holding it either. But in a crowded siege, watching a soldier suddenly shoot fire out of a stick was enough to break enemy morale instantly. Over the next few centuries, engineers kept shrinking that tube and hardening the barrel, and eventually the spear part just fell away completely. What was left was the actual firearm. Every gun on Earth today can trace its family tree back to this ridiculous, flaming bamboo stick. The Hwacha now take that same idea and multiply it by 100, and you get Korea's answer to an artillery barrage. The Hwacha, or fire cart, was a wooden two-wheeled cart topped with a launch pad drilled with up to 200 holes. Each hole held a rocket-powered arrow called a singijun, basically a bamboo tube stuffed with gunpowder and tipped with a steel point. One soldier would light a single master fuse and step back. A second later, up to 200 rockets screamed out at once, all at the same target. At the Battle of Hangzhou in 1593, just 40 of these fire carts helped around 3,000 Korean defenders hold off an army of 30,000 Japanese soldiers. Modern engineers even rebuilt one for a TV show to see if it was real, and it launched almost 200 arrows in a single blast, exactly like the old records claimed. It wasn't a legend, it was history's first rocket launcher, wheeled straight out of the 15th century. Plague Catapults saved the worst for last. In 1346, Mongol forces laying siege to the trading city of Kaffa on the Black Sea were getting wrecked by an outbreak of plague. Instead of retreating, they decided to weaponize their own dead. They loaded plague corpses onto trebuchets and launched them clean over the city walls into Kaffa. The logic was simple and horrifying. Let the disease keep fighting after your Kimba. Historians still debate how much this actually spread the outbreak inside the city compared to rats and fleas doing it anyway. But traders who fled Kaffa are believed to have carried the plague back to Europe with them, right as the Black Death began ripping across the continent, which means one of the deadliest pandemics in human history may have started, at least in part, with a catapult full of dead bodies. Sleep well.